Hello everyone, welcome to today's story. On her very first day stepping into Alex's company, Lytuna was met not with warmth, but with whispers, cold stares, and quiet disdain. She tried to stay strong, but each look pierced deeper than words. And then Alex appeared. His presence shifted the air, his gaze resting firmly on Lytuna. But will he remain silent as a CEO, watching from a distance? Or will he rise to protect the woman he loves, risking reputation to defend her dignity? And if he chooses to speak, will that change how the world sees Lytuna, or only deepen the distance between them? Stay with us until the end of this story to witness how one silent choice could alter everything. And don't forget to subscribe. Help us reach 1,000 followers so we can continue bringing you more heartfelt stories. The polished glass doors slid open, and Lytuna stepped into a world that felt carved from another life. The office shimmered with quiet authority, marble floors reflecting the glow of chandeliers, desks lined with immaculate files, and people moving with the precision of a clock. She held her breath, clutching her small bag tightly, as if it were a shield against the unspoken judgments swirling in the air. Whispers rose like invisible smoke. A pair of eyes glanced at her shoes, slightly dusty from the morning walk across the farm road. Another gaze lingered on her simple dress, a contrast to the tailored suits and crisp blouses around her. Each subtle murmur, each half-suppressed smile pressed against her chest like invisible weights. Lytuna forced a smile, stepping carefully towards the reception desk. Her heart thudded with every step, echoing louder than her heels on the polished floor. She reminded herself why she was here. Because Alex believed in her, because he wanted her close, because she had promised herself she would try. Yet, beneath the hum of the air conditioner, she could hear the quiet questions whispering at the edges of her resolve. Do I belong here? Or am I just a guest in a world that will never be mine? She paused, eyes tracing the tall windows where sunlight streamed in, blinding and golden, as if the city itself was asking her to choose between the soil she knew and this new horizon of glass and steel. In that fragile silence, Lytuna felt the first fracture of doubt within her courage. The hush of the office shifted the moment Alex entered. His footsteps, steady and confident, carried the weight of authority, and yet his eyes searched with an urgency that betrayed something softer. Conversations faltered, keyboards stilled, and the air tightened like a string drawn taut. Lytuna, standing near the edge of the room, lowered her gaze, hoping to blend into the silence. But she could feel it, the sting of eyes still resting on her, the shadow of whispers not yet gone. Alex paused, his glance sweeping the floor. He noticed the stiffness in Lytuna's shoulders, the fragile way her fingers curled against her bag. She looked like someone standing at the edge of two worlds, one pulling her back with familiar soil, the other daring her to step into its cold brilliance. For a moment, Alex stood still, caught between roles. As CEO, he was expected to remain composed, untouchable, a figure above personal sentiment. But as the man who had seen Lytuna's quiet strength in the fields, who had witnessed her care for Henry, he felt a wave of anger ripple beneath his calm exterior. He exhaled slowly, his voice breaking the room's tension. A simple greeting to Lytuna, warm and deliberate, was enough to shift the current. Heads turned, and in that instant, Alex's acknowledgement became a shield, subtle yet unyielding. Tuna dared to lift her eyes. Their gazes met, hers uncertain, his steady, carrying an unspoken promise. You are not alone here. The room resumed its rhythm, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. Respect could not be demanded. It had to be carved from moments like this. That evening, the office's polished echoes gave way to the soft creak of her wooden door. Tuna slipped back into the modest warmth of her home, where the scent of rice and earth mingled, grounding her in the world she knew. Henry stirred in his cradle, a tiny sigh escaping his lips, as if to remind her where her truest belonging lay. She bent down, pressing a kiss to his forehead, her breath catching with a quiet ache. The image of the office replayed in her mind, the sharp lines of glass walls, the murmur of voices, the invisible line between acceptance and disdain. Her heart still carried the sting of those glances, the weight of whispers that doubted her place. She held Henry closer, his small body radiating warmth, anchoring her against the tremors of doubt. Am I strong enough? She asked herself silently. Can love alone bridge the gap between two worlds so far apart? The farm outside her window stretched into the dusk, steady and familiar, its soil forgiving, its silence kind. The company, by contrast, loomed like an unforgiving storm, demanding, glittering, ruthless in its order. She rocked Henry gently, her mind caught between the rhythm of his breath and the relentless pulse of the city that now beckoned her. Between the whispers of disdain and Alex's steady gaze, a chasm of uncertainty opened. Tuna closed her eyes, feeling the pull of two truths, the serenity of her roots and the fire of a future Alex wished for her. And in that fragile balance, she wondered which part of herself she would lose if she chose one over the other. The following morning, the sound of footsteps on the gravel path drew Tuna's eyes to the doorway. Joni appeared, carrying a small parcel wrapped in plain paper, his smile gentle and familiar. I thought Henry might like this, he said, placing the gift beside the cradle where the baby cooed softly in his sleep. The room filled with an ease she hadn't felt since yesterday's sting at the office. Johnny's presence was uncomplicated, like a breeze slipping through an open window, carrying with it the scent of earth after rain. He spoke of his mother, how long it had been since she last saw them, and how her heart ached for the laughter of her grandchild. Hesitant at first, Tuna agreed to join him. Perhaps the comfort of family would soothe the bruise left by strangers' eyes. Later, at the modest home of Johnny's mother, warmth blossomed in every corner. The old woman's arms opened wide, trembling with joy as she held Henry close to her chest. The baby's giggle rang out, light and unguarded, dissolving the weight Tuna had carried since stepping into Alex's world. Around the table, bowls of steaming rice and freshly cooked chicken turned into a feast of belonging, every bite a reminder of simpler truths. As she watched Johnny's mother kiss Henry's cheeks, Tuna felt her chest tighten, not with doubt, but with longing. Here, love asked for nothing but presence. No sharp suits, no whispered judgments, no fragile balance to keep. Only the steady pulse of family, binding her to something eternal. For a fleeting moment, she wondered if this was the peace her heart secretly yearned for. Night fell softly, draping the house in shadows broken only by the dim flicker of a lamp. Tuna sat by Henry's crib, her fingers tracing the rhythm of his breath as though it were a fragile melody. Yet the memory of her ex-mother-in-law lingered like an unsettled ghost, uninvited, heavy, impossible to ignore. She remembered the day vividly, the silence in the room when she turned and found the cradle empty, the sound of her own voice shattering as she screamed Henry's name, the suffocating terror that clawed at her chest until Alex and the police returned with her child. Though Henry had come back unharmed, the echo of that absence had never left her. Tonight it returned, curling around her heart with cold fingers. Tuna's gaze fixed on Henry's tiny hands, curled loosely as he dreamed. What if love wasn't enough to protect him, she wondered. What if history repeated itself? The fear burrowed deeper, sharpening every creak of the wooden floor, every gust of wind rattling the shutters. She pulled the blanket higher over Henry's chest, whispering promises he could not hear, that she would always fight for him, that no shadow from the past would take him away again. Yet even as she whispered, a part of her trembled, knowing that life often tested promises in ways no one could prepare for. The night grew quieter, but her heart did not. She pressed her palms together, not in prayer but in desperation, searching for strength in the silence. In the stillness, Tuna realized that the greatest battles were not fought in boardrooms or farms, but within the fragile walls of her own heart. The next day, Alex arrived unannounced, his presence filling the small room with both comfort and unease. He carried himself with the calm of someone accustomed to control, yet his eyes softened when they landed on Tuna, who was kneeling by the stove, stirring a simple pot of soup. Henry slept nearby, untouched by the currents of adult worry. "Tuna," Alex began, his tone steady but laced with care. "I want you to work with me at the company. Not just for today, not as a guest, but as part of my world." His words hung in the air, heavier than the simmering steam. Tuna froze. The ladle trembled in her hand before she set it down. "Your world," she repeated, her voice quiet, uncertain. She thought of the polished offices, the sharp whispers, the invisible lines drawn by wealth and power. Her heart recoiled, remembering the sting of disdain that had followed her every step. "I don't belong there," she whispered. "I'm used to the soil, to the rhythm of this place. In your company, I feel small." Alex stepped closer, the scent of rain clinging to his jacket. "You are not small," he said firmly. "You are stronger than anyone I know. The company is not only mine, it can be ours if you let it." Her eyes flickered with doubt, caught between the warmth of his faith and the cold edge of her own fear. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by Henry's gentle breathing. Tuna lowered her gaze. "Let me stay where I know myself," she murmured. Yet in the back of her mind, the question lingered. Was refusing his hand protecting her peace, or running from the possibility of a greater life? Clouds gathered as evening settled, their shadows spilling across the fields. The air thickened, heavy with the promise of rain. Tuna stood beneath the wooden awning, Henry cradled in her arms, watching the horizon blur into gray. Alex's phone had rung moments earlier, his secretary's urgent voice pulling him back to the city, to contracts and obligations that would not wait. He lingered at the door, torn between duty and desire. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised, his eyes fixed on hers. The storm outside mirrored the silence between them. full of weight, full of things left unsaid. Tuna nodded, though her heart felt the hollow ache of distance. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "Tomorrow always feels far away." The rain came suddenly, drumming against the roof, softening the outlines of the world. Alex stepped into it, his figure dissolving into the blur of water and dusk, while Tuna held Henry closer, listening to the rhythm of the storm. In that moment, she felt the truth settle deep within her. Love was not only warmth, but also endurance, a quiet defiance against the coldness of doubt. She closed her eyes, letting the rain's murmur carry her thoughts. Perhaps she didn't need to decide now, between the soil and the glass towers, between the past that haunted her and the future Alex offered. Perhaps the lesson was simpler. That strength was not measured by where she stood, but by how she chose to keep walking, even through uncertain storms. And so, as the night deepened and the rain whispered like an old friend, Tuna breathed in the fragile peace of the moment, holding on to the only certainty she had. Love, patient and imperfect, yet enough to guide her forward.
Ngày đầu tiên bước chân vào công ty Alex, Tử Na không nhận ra được không được nhận sự chào đón nồng nhiệt, mà thay vào đó là ánh mắt soi mói, lời xì xào đầy khinh miệt. Cô cố gắng giữ bình tĩnh, nhưng trong lòng dậy sóng, tự hỏi liệu mình thực sự có thuộc về nơi này. Đúng lúc ấy, Alex xuất hiện, ánh mắt lặng lẽ quét qua căn phòng, mang đến Tử Na một niềm vui an ủi thầm lặng. Cô không hề rung động. Sau giờ làm, Tử Na trở về bên Henry, được Son đưa đến thăm mẹ. Giữa hơi ấm gia đình, sự lạnh lẽo chốn công ty, Tử Na đứng trước ngã rẽ nội tâm. Cô phải chọn giữa lấy bình yên quen thuộc hay bước vào thế giới cùng Alex.